seeing a lot of is live streams on TikTok where people sort of disingenuously set up a discussion, and it will be, God doesn't exist, change my mind, or Jesus doesn't exist, prove me wrong, or uh, hell doesn't exist, um, or God, if God will forgive child molesters and killers, how is that good? Um, and their premises that they set up, and most of the premises are saying, well, you cannot prove to me right now, this moment, over TikTok, that Jesus Christ existed. Well, you know, can you prove to me that yesterday happened? Can you prove to me that anything that is historical happened without referring to text? Can you prove to me that anything will happen? The point I'm making is that the only thing you can prove is something that is currently happening. And the account of something require trust. You have to trust that the written text or the written account of something, even a scientific exam, by the way, that you didn't perform yourself, you have to test. And so the only reason you know something has happened is if you went through it. So that's like personal knowledge. Otherwise, you're trusting what somebody else said. Now, something can appear to make sense. I mean, something can even work out mathematically on a piece of paper, and the equation itself can seem to resolve. It doesn't mean that it's actually observable science. So not even an equation is trustworthy. What I mean by that is you can have X, Y, and, different values in a formula, and you can try to find the value to Y or X, whatever. And that can appear to work. Something can work on a piece of paper. It doesn't mean that that's how the universe is operating. It can look like the sun, being orbited by the Earth, and the Earth spinning 1,000 miles an hour is, a workable system, and that can work out in an equation, and it can explain even, day and night, and seasons could be explained. But it doesn't mean that that's the actual reality, simply because it's a working system or model, right? Because there's invention, and invention is something that can be done, and like a system can be achieved in more than one way. Like they say, there's many ways to skin a cat. So I can give you one invented system where something would work theoretically, but it's not necessarily the reality. Correct? So things can even appear to work out on paper. It doesn't mean that they happened. Right? So there's no actual solid evidence for any historical event, other than, like somebody gave the example of Caesar. We know Caesar existed because his face is on a coin. Right? But in actuality, you don't know what Caesar looked like. Right? So there's still a level of trust there. You say, well, there's a lot less trust when somebody has their face on a coin required for their existence than when you're just talking about what somebody said in a book. What? We're not just talking about what somebody said in a book. We're talking about 40 authors over a period of 1,400 years, some of whom never met each other, agreeing on Jesus Christ and his existence. Like, where else do you get that kind of evidence? Nowhere else. There is nowhere else where you get that kind of evidence produced and maintained throughout millennia. I would say that's pretty supernatural. That over 2,000 years, the Bible remains through wars, the rising and falling of empires. That it's passed through the hands of billions of people. That it's maintained the records, and that there is overwhelming extra biblical evidence for the life of Jesus Christ. Now, I was talking to somebody yesterday on TikTok, and they said, well, you show me where there's extra biblical records of Jesus's life. And it's like, if you're having this conversation and you haven't done the research looking for extra biblical evidence, then you haven't actually searched out your premise at all. I had to actually suggest to the guy that he'd Google it, because he obviously hadn't done his research. If he was requiring me to give him extra biblical evidence, was he? Or he was holding a disingenuous position where he had done his research but was trying to conceal his research, because there are only two possibilities there. Either he hasn't done the research, or he's done it and is concealing it, only relying upon my testimony to disprove his claim, which is not a genuine position. So the fact that he hadn't done, if we're to take him at face value, any research of his own to present against his own premise, which is perfectly reasonable, because we should all try to disprove a premise or prove a premise that we have. Right? Bear in mind that the people who set up these premises will not accept supernatural evidence as evidence. They'll only accept physical evidence as evidence. Now, I don't know how you think you can have physical evidence of a person that lived, died, rose again, and ascended into heaven. You're not going to find their body, because they're in heaven. So I don't know what kind of physical evidence you're looking for. And would you accept that a dead man is Jesus Christ? On whose say-so? So the point is this, that there is overwhelming extra biblical evidence. All you have to do is Google it. Just look for extra biblical evidence of the life of Jesus Christ. And that just means evidence of Jesus' life that isn't in the Bible. Now, why on earth somebody would want to discount the Bible as evidence, I don't know. I just don't understand why they'd want to do that. But if they did, you could look at extra biblical sources for Jesus' life. Bear in mind, societies have all maintained the Bible. That's got to say something to you. Societies have maintained the Bible. They've kept it as evidence. It's got to say something to you. It's got to say that it is the most convincing source of evidence for the life of Christ. I mean, I don't know how many people you want to agree on the existence of his life, to write it down and record it, to say that they had conversations with him, to say that they saw him die and rise again and even transfigured before he ascended into heaven. How many personal testimonies do you want to satisfy that he existed? because there are thousands, there are 40 authors in the Bible, but there are thousands of people mentioned in it. Who had some interaction with Jesus. There are 500 people, and this is said to be recorded extra biblically as well. If you did your research and searched it out, if you cared enough, you would. But extra biblically speaking, the accounts of the 500 people that saw Jesus risen from the dead were substantiated in irrefutable evidence. I mean, a judge in modern day will take into consideration the witness of a person. They will take it into account. It's considered evidence, right? So it might not be evidence that convicts a person, because people can lie, but it will still be taken into account, right? So, I mean, 500 people, which is a large population at that time. It's a large portion of people at that time. Do you understand? Because there wasn't as many people in the world. And there wasn't as many people living in one place. But 500 people together in one place is a lot of people together in one place, even today, to see something happen, isn't it? Say, well, 5 people, we have 5 witnesses saying that man struck that woman. Well, that's a lot of witnesses. Well, now multiply that by 100. You have 500 witnesses showing up to the judge to say, we saw Jesus risen. That's a lot of people to get together and lie about something, isn't it? I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying, why would they do it? Right? Why would people say that they witnessed the dead being raised, the blind being made to see, the deaf being made to hear? The thing about the Bible that's so convincing is the fact that it doesn't contradict itself over thousands of years. That, to say that men wrote that suggests that there's this underground conspiracy for thousands of years, carefully calculating the text so that it doesn't contradict itself in any place. You're suggesting the greatest conspiracy that's ever happened if you're suggesting the Bible is written by men to deceive people. And I just don't think human beings over that much time can be that careful. It would have to be demons or angels or something up to that kind of stuff. Because men die and we forget and we lose sources of information, and there has to be some kind of spiritual involvement that spans the generations, that is around longer than a man is, or 2 men are, or 3 men, or 4 men, and so forth. Why? Because there's consensus throughout thousands of years. And you can't get consensus for 5 minutes in most households. Like, have you heard of Chinese whispers? People trying their utmost to pass on a message in a line, in the same room, passing the message from one to the other, outside of the other's knowledge, then trying to pass on that message to the next person in the line. The message is very different at the end of the line than it was at the start of it. Even when people are giving hand signals to each other, it's a very different hand signal by the time it gets to the end of the line. So now tell me that human beings have the ability to keep a message over the course of thousands of years, and in no place or in no part does it contradict itself, that message, or does it change in any way? And now tell me why you would say the Bible isn't a satisfactory piece of evidence. People say you can't prove the Bible by the Bible itself. Well, why not? I mean, it's the most convincing piece of evidence available. It's the most convincing. It's overwhelmingly convincing. Given that if you're reading the Bible in context, it doesn't contradict itself in any place over the course of thousands of years, which it took to compile it. And there are things prophesied in the start of the Bible that came to pass later on in the Bible. There are things that were written into the Bible that were written before those things came to pass. So the prophecies in the Bible alone prove the Bible is true, because they predicted these great events. And were written before the events happened. So, I mean, the fact that you would say, well, I'm only going to accept extra biblical evidence, so you're only going to accept my testimony that evidence exists over TikTok, and that will satisfy that Jesus exists over TikTok. You think that you can be satisfied over TikTok if the Bible doesn't satisfy you that Jesus exists by some extra biblical evidence that I have gotten that you don't know exists or not. That man needs to research. If he wants extra biblical evidence, he needs to research it himself. As far as I know, you can't attach a file on TikTok anyway. He'd only be going by my say-so. So, extra biblical evidence does exist that agrees with the Bible, especially over ancient kingdoms. But specifically about the life of Jesus, there's overwhelming evidence in the Bible itself for the existence of Jesus Christ. Now somebody would say, well, what about the Quran? Well, the Quran came much, much later, and it's nothing to do with Christianity. It certainly doesn't agree with the text. But the Bible has 66 books, all of which agree with each other. The Gospels themselves are by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 4 different men writing 4 different accounts of the same circumstances from their own personal perspectives. And none of their personal perspectives or accounts contradict with the other perspective or account. How's that possible? If they're not telling the truth. They must be telling the truth. So, well, somebody might say, well, anybody can have an alibi and they can agree one with the other. They weren't alibis. They were accounts of events that they witnessed themselves. It wasn't like, well, I was in the house and Johnny can tell you. Again, appealing to a witness, which we have 500 of them accounted for in the Bible and extra biblically outside of the Bible that saw Jesus risen. Bear in mind, people have genuinely, when I say genuinely, sought, genuinely as in they really tried hard to disprove the existence of Jesus Christ. And they made it their life's work. And they went out to go to the places that claimed he existed, go to the sources recorded, the historical accounts of the situations and the circumstances surrounding Jesus' life, to go and disprove the existence of Jesus Christ, the person, the man. And all he found when he tried to do so was overwhelming evidence that Jesus existed. That the more this man searched out to disprove Jesus existed, the more he was convinced he did exist. And that he couldn't refute the existence of Jesus once he started looking. So, I mean, if you consider that people who are educated, who are researchers, who are good at searching things out and finding places and times and people and, archives and libraries and people who are actually good at that activity have travelled and actually gone to the places to search and disprove that Jesus existed. All they were able to do was prove he did exist. I mean, I don't know how that's not going to satisfy you, but me telling you the Bible is backed up by extra biblical account that's not in the Bible, is going to convince you. If somebody who's made it their life's work to disprove the existence of Jesus only found that they could prove he existed, isn't going to prove to you or convince you that Jesus lives. So these premises are ridiculous. It's ridiculous to go on TikTok and say, Jesus Christ didn't exist, prove me wrong. That's ridiculous. What evidence can I give you on TikTok that the Bible doesn't give you, or some extra biblical evidence wouldn't give you? I mean, what do you expect me to give you? The only evidence I can give you is my own personal testimony of the Spirit of God changing me as a person. And actually, that's greater evidence, because I hadn't been exposed to the Bible before Jesus came to me. So it's greater evidence that Jesus would reveal himself to me spiritually and change me as a person for the better, without me needing to read the Bible or do any research on the existence of Jesus, that he could actually supernaturally alter my heart and change me to show me that the Bible was absolutely the true word of God and put that on my heart, is far greater evidence than me going away to learn the Bible from cover to cover. Jesus' existence was made known to me supernaturally by Jesus himself. I didn't need to read the Bible to find out. So if you don't think that's proof, I don't know what you'll accept. By the way, it's called faith for a reason. You have to have faith. You have to trust that the Word of God is the Word of God. You have to trust somehow. You have to have faith. And that's by the dispensation of God. God gives us faith. So if you don't have enough faith to believe, then nothing will convince you. And I mean nothing. Not even Jesus standing in front of you. It didn't convince the Pharisees. They had him killed. And they were descendants of Abraham. So, I mean, Jesus was standing right in front of them and they wouldn't believe him. So, I mean, go figure. Right? So, they obviously existed. They obviously believed he existed, but they didn't believe that he was God. And they were the people of the book. They were the people of the faith. They were the people of Abraham's lineage. They knew that a Messiah was prophesied, and when he stood in front of them, they rejected him. So if you think that evidence will satisfy, it won't. If you're spiritually opposed to Jesus Christ, you won't accept evidence. And actually, you might be even serving the devil in setting up that TikTok. The likelihood is you're a wizard and demonized, because you're actually working against the cross of Christ, trying to create these suckholes that use up the time of people who would otherwise be preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ to the nations. It's just a distraction and a vortex that wants to pull you in, to argue into the spirit of argument and debate and frustration, because this person who's setting up a platform is not actually open in any way to having their mind changed, and therefore it becomes a futile exercise, but for the viewers that might be watching the TikTok as well. And that's why I said to the man, and probably the most powerful thing I said to him was, Google it. Because if you're genuinely trying to prove your own position, you must try to disprove it. Unless you have evidence that is overwhelming, such as supernatural faith. because supernatural faith is more evidence to a person than Jesus standing in front of them. Because where did they get this supernatural faith? So on an individual basis, your faith in Jesus Christ is evidence. But on a collective basis, it's evidence also. But the fact that you don't have faith is only evidence that you don't have Christ. It's not evidence that he doesn't exist. Because there are far more people who believe in Jesus Christ than people who are setting up TikToks to deny his existence. Do you see the point? So there are people getting together to celebrate Jesus Christ thousands of years after his death, and that doesn't convince you? There are people still worshipping him thousands of years after his resurrection and his ascension into heaven, and that doesn't convince you? What will? You say, well, people worship Buddha. Does that not convince you of Buddha? People worship demons, man. But we're talking about the living God. Right? And we know that Satan has set up many world religions, that his demons have set them up to take attention off Christ. And, nowadays they're saying, well, there's Catholicism and there's, Judaism and there's, Islam, and we all worship the same God, we just do it differently. I mean, this is preposterous. That's the devil. The devil is the one over Catholicism. The devil is the one over Protestantism. The devil is the one over Hinduism and Buddhism, because he is the wicked one of the world and the one of the world religions. But Jesus Christ, though righteous, is God himself. And that's why people set up these TikToks to attack him, and they don't set them up to attack the devil. They don't set them up to attack Hinduism. They don't set them up to attack Islam. They don't set them up to attack Catholicism directly as such, unless they're a Christian. So they set them up to attack Christ. Right? The point I'm making to you is that they set up to disprove the existence of God. They set up to attack God, but they don't set up to attack the devil. And even if they set up a TikTok that says God doesn't exist and the devil doesn't exist, they have a picture behind them of Satan, of an image rendering of Satan, not of Jesus, because they don't know what Jesus looked like anyway. They shouldn't be doing it, but they don't do it because they're promoting Satan. Whether they're saying he doesn't exist or not, they're still promoting him with a big picture behind them. So it's clear, and it becomes even more clear, that the people that refute the existence of Jesus are the devil's servants. Or they got whisked up into the debate and think they have a bullet in their gun now that they can fire, and they're operating in a spirit of mockery, a spirit of haughtiness, and they're just not open to the truth because they're conformed to the ways of the world, submitting to their flesh. And this is a spiritual thing. So even if all of the evidence is available and stacked in favour of the existence of Jesus, which it is, they will say, because you don't have specific evidence that I require, I won't believe. And in actuality, it can't be true if you don't provide me this evidence. Like the Muslim says, show me where in the Bible it says Jesus is God, worship me, where he himself says I am God, worship me, and I will become a Christian today. And you say, well, why would you accept the lesser evidence? Does a man saying I am God, worship me prove that he is God? No, of course it doesn't. And nor does it prove a parrot is God if he can say I am God, worship me. So the fact that Jesus was worshipped as a baby by 3 wise men who travelled for a long, long time to get to him and arrived just in time proves more that Jesus is God than him growing to a man and saying, I am God. He didn't send out invitations to these wise men. And how wise were they to travel so far for so long to worship a baby? They must have been wise for that act. They didn't lose their wisdom. They weren't called they used to be wise men. They were called the wise men. There was wisdom in their actions. They went and they knelt down before a baby and worshipped him as God, bringing him gifts as a welcome into the universe that he had created. So if you consider that for a moment as evidence, and you actually get out of your own way for a second and stop thinking that you require extra biblical evidence to prove the existence of Jesus, and actually take the Bible as evidence, you won't find a better source of evidence than the Bible. Because nobody's alive anymore that saw Jesus. Nobody's walking the earth that saw him when he was walking the earth. So you have to trust in some account of somebody somewhere. And why would you think people can conspire in the Bible, but somehow they can't conspire outside of the Bible to support it with extra biblical evidence? So if you're just not going to accept evidence or the testimony of another person, you're just not going to accept it. Whether it's the testimony of a person saying Satan exists, or it's the testimony of a person saying Jesus exists. Unless you're going to accept at some stage the testimony of a person, you're not going to accept the existence of Christ. Because supernatural testimony is still testimony. So you setting up a premise on TikTok saying, Jesus doesn't exist, prove me wrong, is a disingenuous position that is absolutely ridiculous. When you're not even presenting evidence yourself, you're only collecting it. You're not even telling people how you've arrived at your position that Jesus doesn't exist, because you would have had to do a lot of research to show that Jesus doesn't exist if you're only using extra biblical evidence to establish your premise or refute it. Otherwise, you're just sitting on a rock, saying the rock is yours, without proving it at all. And that's what lizards do. Maybe if I stare at this person long enough, they'll go away from this rock, and then I can claim it for my own. That's reptilious behavior. It's lizard behavior. And that's what demons are. Just reptiles. So when they set up in a person to set that person up to do some activity like the refutation of the existence of God, or Christ Jesus, the man himself, they're not being genuine, because they're not actually producing any evidence themselves. It'd be different if somebody was saying, look, I've done a lot of research on this, and here's my research, and here's the evidence I found for the existence of Christ, and here's my evidence that has convinced me that he doesn't exist. Because if you're only using evidence to establish your position, you must have a lot of evidence telling you that Jesus didn't exist. Let's see it. But that's not the position they take. The position they take is, I have the high ground. You prove me wrong. You know what I'm saying? How have you gotten to that position? Show us the evidence that led you there. Oh, you haven't bothered? Well, then you're just a lazy rock sitter, and you're not bothering to do any research yourself. Why should I do it for you? The Bible itself is overwhelming evidence of the existence of Jesus Christ. So even if I do my research for you, you won't accept it. You won't accept the greatest form of evidence for the existence of Jesus Christ, and are looking for other evidence, which is lesser evidence, just like the Muslim who says, show me in the Bible where it says, I am God, where Jesus says, I am God, worship me, and I will become a Christian. That's lesser evidence than other evidence in the Bible. Jesus is the good shepherd. None are good but God alone. That Jesus is the way and the truth and the life. Yeah. Like he's life. I mean, anybody who claims to be life is God. So there are different ways of explaining that you are God without actually saying, I am God. And so if the Muslim genuinely read the Bible, he wouldn't be asking for lesser evidence when he has greater available evidence. Like ascending from the dead, who does that of a Sunday? You know what I mean? Like he rose from the dead, ascended into the heavens. Like who do you think he is? But Muhammad is still in the grave. Your prophet's still in the grave like all the other prophets. And you claim Jesus is just another prophet. Well, that doesn't make sense. Because Jesus is ascended into heaven. Yes, there are others who ascended into heaven and were translated, like Enoch. But Jesus ascended, right? After death, having risen again. And Jesus himself rose others from the dead. He called them forth from their tomb. He rose a little girl from the dead. Talitha Kumi. Jesus rose the dead while he was in the earth. And you saying, show me where Jesus said, I am God. Surely Jesus doing things that God can do alone, or that God can only do himself, or God and nobody else can perform, should prove to you more than Jesus saying, I am God, that he is in fact God. So if somebody is saying to you, show me lesser evidence, which isn't actual solid, irrefutable evidence, they're not being genuine. They're trying to lead you to discuss something that isn't actually evidence for the existence of Christ as God himself. So think about that for a moment. Why would somebody approach you and ask you for something as conclusive evidence, which isn't even evidence at all? Because they're trying to move you from your sure place and sure base of evidence to a place that you're searching evidence or discussing a premise that isn't proof. Because demons are always trying to remove you from a sure place. So when you say, show me in the Bible where Jesus said, I'm God, worship me, I would say, show me first how that would prove he's God. And you can't. So don't ask me to go down the cul-de-sac with you. You see, Jesus doing things that only God can do is evidence. Jesus saying, I am God, worship me, is not. Jesus raising the dead says that he is God. Jesus saying, I am God, does not say he is God. Even though I know he can't lie, and if he did say that, it would be true. It still doesn't prove his deity. It doesn't prove a man is God for the man to say he is God. It proves that that God is in that man, that is God in the form of a man, if that man raises people from the dead or claims to have the power to forgive their sins. Absolutely. He's showing that he has the power and the authority of God. Therefore God. You say, show me where the man says I am God and I'll worship him. I would say that's weak. Because what if somebody else comes along next week and says, I am God, worship me? Will you run after him instead? What if there were 5 people in the room saying, I am God, worship me? Which one would you believe? That must be very confusing for you. So what's going to be the differentiator? Because many people have claimed to be God. So what's going to be your differentiator between all those people that claim to be God? I would say a man raising people from the dead and raising from the dead himself is pretty conclusive. Because he's the only one that rose from the dead himself. I'd say that's pretty conclusive evidence, wouldn't you? But people who are not accepting evidence don't care how convincing it is. So guys, don't waste your time with them. Like, I mean, don't waste a lot of time with them. Do say your piece, but don't spend a whole lot of time going around in circles with them. Because they'll set up these premises just to suck your attention and your focus. And to try and appear, you know, like they're right and you're wrong and your position is pathetic. Because you can't prove what they're asking you to prove. You can't present what they're asking you to present when they haven't searched for it themselves. Because if they had have searched for it themselves, they would have found it. And that's why I told the man, Google it. Why don't you Google extra biblical evidence and you'll find it? Other people have done this hard legwork before. Why don't you just trust in their work? Because why would you trust in their work if you won't trust in the testimony of Christ himself? Why would you trust in their testimony if you won't trust in the testimony of the people that witnessed his life? You know what I'm saying? Like, the Bible is the most powerful piece of evidence that humanity has for the existence of Christ. And if you don't see that, it's because you're blinded by demons. And you need to read the Bible yourself and understand that this is a book, actually 66 books, but you can technically call it a book because it has a spine and a cover. But it's actually a compilation of 66 books by 40 authors over a very long period, thousands of years. And in no place does the Bible contradict another part of the Bible. So it's not just one book. It's 66 books over thousands of years, all agreeing one with the other. That is the most powerful piece of evidence for the existence of Jesus Christ as God that is available to human beings. Why would you accept a lesser source of evidence as confirming the Bible or denying it? Because you can't deny the Bible. If it's the greatest available evidence, there is no other evidence that will deny it. Because it's the greatest available evidence, surviving the longest in its form. And there are people that have tried to refute it throughout the ages and fallen away. They're all dead, but the Bible remains. Kings, empires couldn't bury the Bible. Why? Because God holds it up so that you can read it. It's supernatural intervention. So the Bible's existence today says that there's supernatural intervention, supernatural power, making that available to you to read it. If that won't convince you, nothing will. But the intervention of God himself, his own intercession in your life, his own spiritual awakening, and his impartation of faith, because supernatural evidence is greater than natural evidence. But it's unique to the person. That evidence is unique to the individual person. But it's their personal testimony. But what even gets more convincing is that when individual people who've had supernatural awakening, who never met each other, can go and meet in a room and say, I've had the same supernatural intervention as you have had. And then they can talk to each other and they can have common ground and all of that. And they've been both led to that place to talk to each other about the existence of Christ and to worship him. I would say that is greater evidence than all the extra biblical evidence available from surrounding the time and the area where Jesus was and when he was. It's greater evidence that two people who've never met would have supernatural intervention to be led to the Bible and to worship God together for no other reason than Jesus has revealed himself to them spiritually. Do people just usually just randomly end up in a room together? Just with this exact same goal? Maybe if they're applying for a job in McDonald's. But like, we're talking about people who'd be 30, 40, 50 years old, suddenly realizing that God exists and that they should follow and worship Jesus. Do you see what I'm saying? And then every word of the Bible confirming their faith as they read through it. And God leading them by his counsel, personal counsel, to be able to properly interpret the Bible and the text, which scholars struggle to do, and linguists, because they've had supernatural counsel and revelation of God. So guys, I would just caution you, don't be sucked in to the vortex of ridiculing Christians. It's a spiritual vortex. And always question, is the person with the premise, have they done their research to disprove their own claim? Because they're asking others to. And it's not good to have such a position when you're a lazy person. Why don't they go and Google it themselves before they go on TikTok and start asking other people? Be a good start, wouldn't it? Blessings in Jesus' name.